morning, church. So, my name is Lee. I'm one of the student ministry associate directors, in case you guys don't know. So, today we're going to be in Exodus chapter 13. We're going to be starting in verse 17 and going all the way to the end of chapter 14. So, Exodus chapter 13, starting in verse 17, going all the way to the end of 14. So, in case you guys didn't know, we do have these Exodus books that we've been giving away each Sunday. So if you do need one, you can raise your hand and maybe one of these lovely ushers will gladly give you one of those if you do need one of those. So they are for free. You can take them home. You can write in them, take your notes. They look beautiful. So go ahead and take, if you do need one, let us know. So as you guys are doing that, I think as we dive into this story, there are a few things there's one main thing that I think we get out of this. The one main thing is that the whole purpose of this is that God wants to display his glory. So what does that mean? It means that he wants to tell the whole world, Egypt, Israel, us, that he is the one true God, that he is worthy of praise and honor, that he is the same God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the past, the God of the present, and the God of the future. He wants them to know that he is the only one worthy of being praised, that all of those false gods of Egypt, they are nothing compared to who he is. That they are not real. He's the real one. He's the one that should be feared. He's the one that should be honored. He's the one that should be praised. That's the entire passage. That is what he's trying to do. Really simple. He's trying to just get to us to understand that this is about his glory. So, with that being said, let's dive into our text. We are going to be I'm going to read the section in chapter 13, verses 17 through the end. So I'm going to read that with us real quick. You guys ready? So it says this: When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines. Although that was near, God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around the way of the wilderness towards the Red Sea. And the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt, equipped for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. And they moved on from that one place and encamped in the other place and on the edge of the wilderness. And then the Lord went before them by day and in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way. And by night, a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. So, in this passage, I think we see three ways that God displays his glory. You guys with me? Here they are. The first one is God's plan. God knew his people. He knew that it would take them forever to understand what they were about to do. Think about this. They've been in Egypt, they've seen all these plagues, but yet he knew that they wouldn't still understand all the things that they needed to get through. He knew that they needed to go a long way in order for them to actually understand who God was. There's other reasons why. I think one of the other reasons is that he knew that if they went the shorter direction, that they would have to face battle and face Egyptians' fortifications on the way. He also knew that they weren't strong enough to fight those fortifications or the Philistines. He knew that they might have had weapons, but they weren't ready to fight. He knew his people. He knew that they needed to be freed more, not only physically from Egypt, but he also knew that if they didn't actually get away from Egypt completely, that one day they would always be looking over their shoulder, waiting for Egypt to attack them again. He knew what they would do. He also knew that he made a promise to Moses all the way back in chapter 3 that one day that they would worship God on a mountain. He said that this is how you know that I am with you, that one day you will be worshiping God there. Exodus chapter 3, verse 12. And then he also knew that when they went the long way and went to that mountain, that they would have a chance to get a chance to know who God was even better. They would get a chance to see God's glory in the Ten Commandments. He knew that they needed to go the long way in order to know how to truly worship him. God is guiding them. He's protecting them. He's giving them hope, all by giving them the long way. But we also see God's faithfulness. I know that's really hard to see here in this text, but I think we see it in the fact that they carried Joseph's bones. Here's the thing for me. I understand this might not seem weird to you, but they had been enslaved for 400 years, and they kept Joseph's bones. No one else might find that to be weird, but I find that a little bit strange. Why in the world would they want to keep the bones of a dead man? It's because they knew that the bones represented something bigger than just Joseph. It represented God's promise to always be with them. God promised that one day, they would be in the promised land. And those bones are representation that one day we're going to get there. I might not always believe it, but I'm keeping these bones as a marker that God will one day get us there. It's a reminding of God's faithfulness. Then we also see God's presence. This one's a little easier for us to see. It's called a pillar of clouds and a pillar of fire, guys. We clearly see it there. That God is with them in the daytime by giving them shade as they walk through the desert and with the cloud, and giving them warmth and light at night in a fire. God is in there with them, in presence with them. It's a unique opportunity that each and every day they get to actually experience the presence of God. So, with that being said, I want to move on to chapter 14. And in chapter 14, we see those same three repeating things again. God's presence, God's faithfulness, and God's plan over and over again. Here's what happens. Boom. They get to the Red Sea, and then all of a sudden they see chariots. Oh no, the Egyptians are coming. They're not happy about this. Why would they be happy about this? The Egyptians are coming not just to enslave them, but to slaughter them. They know death is coming. They are not happy about this. So they look at Moses, what everyone would do, and be like, Moses, my man, homie, my brother, did you just take us out of Egypt just to get us killed here? Now, I don't think being a slave is fun, but I also don't think getting murdered in the desert is fun either. So they're just like, no, we're not doing this. Please, no. So they complain to Moses. Moses says these three things. Here you go. Fear God, stand still, be silent. Seems like a great idea for them to do. He then tells them, stop complaining, and then Moses goes in after he tells them to stop complaining and goes, God, what are we supposed to do? Then God tells him, why are you talking to me? Go do what I asked you to do. Go stretch out a stick over the water. Water's going to part. Water parts. Boom. While the water's parting, that cloud of fire that was in front of them goes behind them, protects them from the Egyptians. Really great time. While the cloud's there, they cannot see the all 3 million plus Israelites cross the Red Sea on dry ground. Boom, Moses says no. When the Egyptians try to cross behind them, water comes down, gone. All right, so here we go. Now, we are going to jump into where we see God's plan, God's promise, God's presence, and God's faithfulness here. So let's start with God's plan. Verse 3, in chapter 14, we see God's plan starting here. For Pharaoh will say to the people of Israel, they are wandering in the land, the wilderness has shut them in, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh, and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, and they did so. And then we also see it again echoed in verse 17, and I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so they shall go after them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all of his hosts and his chariots and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen. What's God's plan? His plan is simple. He wants to get the glory. How is he going to get the glory? He's getting the glory by protecting his people. And here is the fun ways he is doing it. We see the proof of God's plan in many surprising ways. He sends them first to go to the Red Sea, where it looks like they're trapped. They can't go anywhere. Only thing in front of them is a sea and desert and the Egyptian soldiers. They are trapped. It looks like nothing can happen for them. And then he's going to gain glory through Pharaoh and his army. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but the Egyptian army at this time is probably one of the most toughest armies that you can go across. Having 600 chariots is like, I don't know what the equivalent would be in an army today, maybe like 600 nukes. I don't know, but it just seems like it's a bit extreme to go out of people that aren't actually armed and aren't really dangerous. Pharaoh is coming to make an example out of them. And God is going to use their strength as their greatest weakness. And then we see God wants the Egyptians to know that he is the Lord. Even in the midst of knowing that he is going to destroy them, he is still making a way of salvation for them. That, hey, even though these people have been worshiping false gods, they have idolatry in their hearts, they've never worshiped God, God is still in the midst of his judgment saying, hey, I'm giving you a way to come back to me. That they can know, just like the scriptures say for us in John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believed in him would not perish but have everlasting life. He is still giving that same promise, not only to us, but to the Egyptians there, that they can turn to God and he would be their God too. All they have to do is see him as their Lord. And we also see it in one of these really cool ways. There is this really cool place that they go to. It's called Bela Zimphion. Don't make fun of me. Okay, I know I didn't pronounce that right. But this was a place that was literally named after the gods of Egypt. It's an actual place that that's where they are. That's where they're trapped between. And it's a physical representation that God is coming in to destroy all their gods and make an example that he is the true God in the place where they're worshiping other gods. That's so cool to me. That God is in here saying the glory is going to me, not to them. So, we see God's plan. Now let's look for God's faithfulness. In verse 13, we see this. And Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm, and see that salvation is of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you will have only to be silent. The Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Let's set the scene here, guys, man. God gives them these three instructions to fear not, to stand firm, and to be silent. Why would he give these three instructions? I think the first thing we see with fear not is that, hey, they are about to be killed, guys. Like this is life or death, and God is telling them to fear not. Why would he tell them not to fear? Because he wants their fear to be in something bigger than just them. It's not the most terrifying thing isn't them. They should have a fear of who he is. They had their distractions on the people coming after them and not focusing on God. It's a normal reaction to have that kind of fear there. I know I would be. I know I'd be scared if I had that happen to me. I was going to say something else. We're not going to say that. So, but God is telling them to not fear because he wants them to have a focus on him. The second thing we see is that God says, stand still or be still. He's telling them to stay there because God is about to do something amazing in them. He's saying he is about to fight for them. You don't need to do anything. I'm about to do the work. Just stay there and watch this army march upon you. Then Moses does something crazy. He tells them to stop crying out to them. Why in the world would he tell them to be silent? Because I think too often sometimes we get to a place where we think we have to continue to pray and continue to do this and continue to do that. But God is actually calling us sometimes to work, to do what he called you to do. Stop thinking about it, be about it. And then we have this really cool thing. God says, you will see who I am. And then he says, God will fight for you. These are promises that if we do these three things, God will do these three things. We will see, and God will fight. So how do we see God's presence there? We go to verse 19. Then the angel of God, who was going before the host of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them, come between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. And there was a cloud and the darkness, and it lit up the night without one coming near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, and the waters being the walls to them on their right hand and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And in the morning watched the Lord in the pillar of fire and of the cloud looked down on the Egyptians, forces and threw the Egyptian forces into panic, clogging their chariots' wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, and the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hands over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all of the hosts of Pharaoh and that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained, but the people of Israel walked on dry land through the sea, the waters being the walls on them to them on their right hand, on their left. How do we see God's presence? This is a dramatic display of God's power and his almighty power. The angel of God moved from in front of his people to the rear. He moved to stand between Israel and the Egyptians. He moved to protect God's people from the attack of the Egyptians. The pillar of cloud moved to the pillar of cloud was, I think what we see here is that the pillar of cloud is not just a pillar. It becomes complete darkness for the Egyptians. They couldn't see. Think of like a heavy fog that was a soupy, dark blackout where they could not see light. They could not see the moon or the stars. They were in obvious pitch black and a total inability to see just a few feet in front of them. And God's mighty power was demonstrated through his servant Moses. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and God's power acted. God made a way to escape. He made a strong east wind blow the sea back at night. The water stood up as piled up high, and he dried the ground underneath their feet as they walked. I think what's really cool about this term is when we see the wind blowing, there's this awesome Hebrew word that I will not try to pronounce at all because I have no clue how to pronounce it, and I don't want any smoke. So here's the word used to split the water is the same word for splitting rocks and wood or splitting the earth asunder in an earthquake. This is a powerful wind that is blowing back the sea. There's a passage in the valley where 3 million plus Jews can walk through on dry land. That is what's happening here. And God delivers their people as they walk through dry land as these waters rage next to them. It is a sight to see. I can imagine that all the eyes were fastened upon this unbelievable sight as these massive walls, miles high, as people are walking through, like doing that little like baby step, not really trusting it at all. And then as they march through, there's this really weird thing that happens to me. I still will never understand why the Egyptians would see this and decide, you know what? I want to go into that. Because to me, I just saw water turn. I just saw the Nile just turn into blood. I saw frogs. I had my oldest son killed. I do not want any more crazy stuff happening to me. But maybe it was the rage of the Egyptian Pharaoh, or maybe it was just the hardening of his heart, or maybe it's this bitter revenge. He just could not believe that these people were actually going to get away with it. I can just picture the moment that the fog lifts and he hears this water and he hears this storm this entire night. He has to know something's going on. He probably knows the Israelites are moving, but yet he has no idea that when the fog lifts, that he's going to see these massive amount of water up in the air. And he, in his zeal for life, decides, I am going to take all of my army into that. And what happens? Boom, it's gone. It's over. God looked down upon the Egyptians, and this phrase, look down, it's always tied to God looking down in mercy or in wrath in this event. God looked down in wrath and judgment on the Egyptians, and he caused them to become confused. The pillar of cloud and of fire disturbed and troubled them. He caused the chariots and the rams and others to knock into each other's, and then he caused fear to strike into their heart. And then God delivered his people by executing the judgment and justice upon the Egyptians. Note that God's instructions to Moses to stretch out his hand over the seas. The waters were to flow back for the Egyptians. God on the Egyptians. Moses obeyed God. God executed justice upon the Egyptians. And the Lord caused the sea to flow back, and the Egyptians were swept into the sea. Let's go down to the last verse here. Why did God do all of this? Verse 31. Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. God took them the long way around. And in the end, they did what God asked them to do. Look at this. The Israelites walked on dry land. God saved them from the Egyptians. The Israelites saw the dead and the evil that enslaved them on the shoreline. And God's purpose was accomplished. He turned them towards them. They were able to see his glory. They were able to see that God would fight for them. God took them the long way, and God's people saw his power. God's people feared, and God's people believed in him and his messenger. The people now placed their trust in God and in his leadership of Moses, and they were now fully ready to follow God and his servant into the promised land. The thing I think God wants us all to get out of this is the same call that he gives to them, is trust in the Lord. I think that is our question today, and a question I have for all of us, is do you trust God in the midst of all of these situations? I know in my life, it's been so hard to trust God, and when the things seem like it's hit the fan. I know in my life, when I got just getting here, I had to move to Texas, then move back here, and feel like I didn't have a job, and then all of a sudden, God opens a door, and I'm a year and a half later, I'm standing here. I didn't know how I would get here. I know I have 3 beautiful little girls now, but like the long way, I had two miscarriages on the way. It was hard to trust God in the midst of all of those broken situations. I remember the first time when my first grandparent died, and I had the privilege of telling my nephew that his grandmother was gone. And I had to understand that for the first time in my life, do I trust this God that says that one day I will get to see her and I'll get to see all of my grandparents again? Do I trust him? And I think that is our call today as we look through these situations and we look at our lives. That God is trying to tell us, hey, I deserve the glory because I'm big enough, I'm strong enough to handle whatever situation you're going through. And I'm here for you. I will fight for you. The only question now for us is, do we trust it? Amen?